In this demonstration, we're going to talk about users, workspaces, roles, and see how they develop into the concept of permissions in Oracle Intelligence Advisor. I want you to notice that I'm logging in with the user admin. You may remember from the presentation that admin is installed automatically if you're on a private cloud and is instantiated automatically if you're in public cloud. And this user is set up as the hub administrator. So the hub administrator pretty much has access to all of the administrative tasks that you would associate with an Oracle Intelligence Advisor project. We're going to focus, however, on the permissions tile over here. And you'll notice that the permissions tile is broken into three parts. We have workspaces, API clients, and users. You'll recall from the presentation that API clients are programmatic users, as opposed to users where I am right now, which we can think of as normal human users. I'll show you that we have three users currently defined. We have the admin, which we mentioned earlier, and we have author and author 2. These are just for demonstration purposes. As we spoke about in the presentation, you would expect to use clearly identifiable names for your colleagues. Let's start, however, by creating a workspace. A workspace, recall from the presentation, is essentially a folder or a location where we can store projects. So I'm going to call this, let's call this benefit projects. Notice that we get to choose one or more channels, which is like saying that projects that go into this workspace are destined to be deployed in the following ways. Are you going to deploy as an HTML interview? Are you going to deploy as a web service or as part of a chat service? Additionally, you can lock existing deployments into this workspace so that those channels become fixed. Down at the bottom of the page where we're working with our new collection, our new workspace, you'll see the list of users we saw a moment ago. And we can select one or more roles for each user in this workspace. So author 2 will dispose of more permissions in this workspace than author. And I'll make admin both the author and the manager as well. As we spoke about earlier, you'll notice that API clients have a limited set of permissions, and they have manager, which we spoke about, chat service, which we spoke about, and determinations API allows the API client to also access the web services that you can see listed above, the assess service and the interview service. So an API client has a subset of permissions. In most projects, an API client would typically be either for the purpose of managing the hub, so automating the creation of users, automating deployments, and so on, or it is used to manage access to services like the determinations web services or the chat web service, although it's absolutely possible to have all three roles with the same API client. I'm going to go back to the users, and just to remind us, you'll notice that author has less permissions than author 2. I'll apply those changes. Now I'm going to start Oracle Policy Modeling, and we'll see the connection. I've started Oracle Policy Modeling, and I'm about to create a new project. So I'll create a new project called Benefits Project 1, or Benefits 1, and I'll click Create. As you learned about in previous chapters, this is now being saved on my local hard drive. And indeed, we can see that it's stored in this location. At the top of the Project tab, notice in the ribbon that I have two choices, Add Project to Repository or Deploy Snapshot. Recall from the presentation that we spoke about how there are essentially two version tracking mechanisms, two ways of pushing your work to the server, pushing your work to the hub. If you wish to simply create a snapshot, a checkpoint, and send that to the hub, well, the first time you do it, you'll see Add Project to Repository. So I'm going to put in version 1 and click Add. I'll be required to log in with my password. I'm going to use author for this. I'm going to log in as author. I'll be asked which workspace I want to store my new project in. The list of workspaces will be displayed according to my permissions. If I have no role in a workspace, it will not display here. So I'll choose Benefit Projects. And now my work has been stored as well on the hub. And if I go to the hub pane, I'll see here that version 1 was checkpointed and sent to the hub at 9:49 a.m. today. So now I have my local version and the server version. Obviously, once that is established, you'll notice here in the pane that the Add Project to Repository button has disappeared, and now I simply have Upload to continue uploading new versions. So I'm going to simulate that by adding a rule to my Word document. The customer is eligible benefit if the customer meets the criteria. And I'll format this accordingly. So I've created my project file. I've validated the Word document. Notice that now there is a marker to tell me that this has been modified locally. We'll speak about what that means in just a second. But now that I've made a change, I will upload the changes and I will say this is version 2. Version 2 is now present on the hub. So let's go back to the hub and see what that really means. In the projects area, I will see benefits 1. I will drill down and see that both versions have been stored. Anyone with sufficient permission can download any of those development versions. Notice, however, that in the deployment section, benefits 1 does not appear because the upload feature is not in respect of deployments, it's in respect of development work that is ongoing. As and when my project is ready to be deployed and I want to share it with my end users, well, let's just create a benefits screen here, and let's add my input. And let's say that I now wish to deploy this. Well, what does that actually mean? It means that I'm beginning the process of making this HTML interview, in my case, accessible to people who are not part of my team, who are maybe testers or end users, employees, or even citizens. It'll depend, of course, where you are deploying to, where your hub is located. So when I click Deploy Snapshot, I want you to notice 3 things. First of all, the deployment name is the same by default as the project name. So this is going to be version 1 for testing. And I'm going to deploy. And I'm going to deploy it to the same folder. Notice the message. So the second thing we need to be clear on is that author only had the author role, which means the author can upload, but cannot actually activate this deployment. It cannot be made public. So I'll click OK and click Close. When I return to the hub and I refresh the deployments page, you'll notice it says Benefits 1 is here, but Benefits 1 is currently inactive. As I said, but author has been able to push it and has been able to deploy it, but it is not yet accessible to anyone. Notice that no channels are selected. Again, if I have permission to do so, I can download it, delete it, and so forth. So I'm going to go into this Intelligent Advisor Hub, and I'm going to log in as author. And I want you to notice that in the HTML page of the hub, the welcome page matches my permissions that we saw earlier. The author can only look at projects. There's benefits 1, and deployments. There's benefits 1. However, author is not able to activate, is not able to push to that final step. If I log in as author 2, however, you'll recall that author 2 had manager permissions on the same workspace. When I return to the Deployments tab and I go to Benefits, you will notice that author 2 does have permission to activate one or more channels because author 2 has permission to perform those activities as part of their manager role in this workspace. So let's say that we want to do this. Once this is activated, the URL can be copied, sent to your colleagues for testing, or can be opened in a new tab. So the project is now active in the sense that people who are not authors, managers, administrators can now access it simply by accessing the URL that I maybe sent to them in Teams or I sent to them in an email. So going back to the starting point, I will log out and log back in as admin. Admin can go to deployments. Admin also has permission on this folder, so admin can also change those workspace options, can also change the options for deployment because of the permission on the workspace. Let's briefly take a look at what previous versions would have looked. So returning to the Oracle Policy Modeling tool, it should be clearer now the relationship between the versions that are displayed here, the functionality of the upload button, and the functionality of the deploy snapshot button, representing two different ways of saving information on the hub. Remember that collaboration is license-based, so if these buttons are no longer present or are inactive or do not function, it's because perhaps you don't have the license to use it. And that concludes our demo for Module 12.
Let's summarize what we've seen in this chapter. Basically, anyone who wants to be a useful part of a team needs to have a user defined in the hub and needs to have at least one role. Make sure you name them in a decent and organized fashion. Make sure you regularly review users and permissions, because one thing I often see is Oracle Intelligent Advisor hubs with dozens of users. And when I ask, well, what do these users do? Somebody says, well, no, we don't use this one anymore. Consider disabling them or simply removing them if they're no longer required, or reducing the number of roles that they have. Every little helps. And finally, we talked about the difference between a normal user and an API client, so that you can use an API client to access certain features programmatically. That wraps it up for Module 12. See you in Module 13.